computer. Right, so we're now recording live. I'll just give a bit of a pause so then Zolt can later edit easier. All right, so I wanna welcome Sarah Bacaller, and I didn't say that right.
You said it perfectly, Mila. That was fine. That was great.
Um, so my guest today is Sarah, and she's kindly agreed to come on and speak to us about her thesis, which she's just recently completed, and an edited book, which sounds super exciting, and I can't wait to ask you about that. But just briefly, by way of welcoming you, uh, as I understand and have the details right, please correct me. You're a writer, editor, researcher based in Melbourne. You've just completed your PhD on Hegel's philosophy of religion, and you have edited a book called Apostate: Stories of Deconversion, and that sounds exciting, as I said. So your writing generally spans across various disciplines. And you've published both in the popular and academic spectrums. So that sounds really cool. And Sarah, you also have a Thrive Audio um, project. Is that right? You produce audiobook,
Yeah, business. Yeah, an audiobook production business. Yeah.
and you've done 70 plus commercial audiobooks.
Yeah, that I've narrated. Yeah, and have produced some others. So,
Oh,
yep,
sounds
keep it busy.
exciting. Sounds good. So Sarah, welcome.
Thank you.
Is there anything I've missed from your bio that you wanna?
Uh, well, the latest thing, Milad, is that I'm actually ridiculously back in student mode. So I've just started at Deakin studying psychology, which I started studying about 15 years ago.
Right.
Um, but I'm kind of looking for, I don't know, I guess practical ways to use the skills that I've developed in philosophy so far. So I'm kind of launching into the psych space and hoping that'll open up some work opportunities, particularly in my local area, sort of down the track. Yeah.
Mm, sounds good. Sounds very exciting. I mean, the marriage of religion and psychology is obviously in itself a
Mm,
fascinating area, and maybe we can have another conversation down the track.
yeah.
To
Sounds great.
what you discover and explore there, and perhaps publish and produce. So that would be awesome. In the meantime, I was kind of reading the sort of blurb of apostate,
Uh-huh.
the deconversion, and that, I mean, immediately it sort of it grabbed me because the the story, the 21, how many
Hmm.
stories? 21? Yeah, 21 people. Um, this is incredible. This kind of navigating the terrain of when you're sort of in a way, you can correct me afterwards, of course, but like you're stuck in a religion, and you can't get out, or you want to get out but you can't, and you don't know how, and this kind of tremendous stress and pressure of having to conform, or being singled out if you have a different position or a different idea or understanding, or want a different kind of way of life.
Mm.
This is an incredibly um, difficult situation for anyone to be in, and I fully appreciate that. So I'm keen to learn a little bit more about this book. I think, if you don't mind, maybe we'll start there.
Yeah, absolutely. Love to talk
How
about
did
that.
you come about writing this or editing this? Is one of
Yeah,
the stories in there, or do you have a story in there? Or
I don't. I've just written the introduction. At this point, I've sort of yeah, kind of stepped back, and I have said to the other contributors though, I feel like they're sort of um, sharing my story through their stories in a way, giving voice to my voice through their voices. um, without sort of going into specifics, but oh, it came about. It was one of those like lightning bulb inspiration moments, which I mentioned in the introduction of the book. I was camp like in a we hired a camper van, my husband and daughters and I, and we were down on the coast, Mornington Peninsula, and down in Victoria, which is not far from where we live. And I was lying in the top bunk, so my nose was about 5 centimeters from the roof of the van, and it was bedtime. And all of a sudden, I was like, I had this idea for this book, like this deconversion stories book, one of those like bolt upright in bed kind of moments. But I didn't sit bolt upright, which was lucky given the context. The precursor to that was that I had written a novella that is sort of, I don't know, literary fiction, kind of follows the story of a young adult female who's grown up in the church context and is wrestling with a whole lot of kind of cognitive dissonance, develops a friendship with an older woman, and through that she sort of has the security to ask those big questions that are bubbling away under the surface, and to confront those, and to sort of confront those through that the biggest and most confronting aspect of our lives, which is death, maybe alongside birth or whatever. Well, I mean, she's also dealing with birth because she's a young mum. So there are sort of both of those aspects. But I reached out to some different bookstores, and to a Christian bookstore in particular, a well-known Christian bookstore in Australia. And I asked them if they were interested in stocking the novella, and kind of got a very brusque reply that was sort of more curt than it needed to be, and kind of stung a bit. So I was sort of looking for somewhere to vent and people who would kind of understand. And I don't know how it came to mind, but I sort of found a few different deconversion groups, or groups on Facebook, where they were sort of set up for people kind of exploring or feeling like they're on the fringes of faith, trying to figure out, feeling like, oh, there's a whole lot of problems with this for me now, but I'm not sure where to go next. Or I've just stepped out of a really kind of, I don't know, tight, closed kind of religious community, and I'm totally isolated. And so these online communities provide a space for people to connect with others in similar circumstances. And then I kind of realized, well, actually that novella is probably going to resonate actually with people who are going through that process quite well. So kind of, I mean, it was a bit of an ulterior motive and just an emotional outlet to join. But I found one group in particular that I joined, and kind of, did an initial post, like it wasn't a big rant or anything, but just expressing what had happened, and why can't people be more, I don't know, polite, open-minded, whatever. And I kind of just hung it out on the fringes of this group for a while. But what I noticed, I mean, I was seeing these posts from people on a regular basis, very raw, very much in the midst of existential anguish and relational challenges, like in marriages, for example, where one person begins questioning a faith that both people belong to, and that their marriage is sort of, they feel that it's sort of been founded upon, or people, with parents or siblings, or people struggling with sexuality issues that are really causing a lot of friction in religious contexts. And I was really actually blown away by not only how vulnerable people were willing to make themselves, but also by the extent of their suffering, actually, and also by the depth of compassion that was being shown by other people in the group. And the particular group that I was spending the most time in was linked to a podcast called The Graceful Atheist. And so immediately that word of graceful kind of shows that, it's not an aggressive rejection of the Christian faith and sorts of themes that kind of come with that, like grace and forgiveness and whatnot, but it's actually trying to wrestle with, I don't know, very challenging questions and experiences in a gracious and graceful kind of way. And that tone sort of pervaded the Facebook group as well. So I was like, man, like these stories, it's really important for these stories to be heard. And I've kind of been following along as the sort of deconversion genre within kind of popular nonfiction has sort of developed. Tara Westover's book Educated was sort of like a really big best-selling title that I don't know, has opened up that field quite significantly. And actually, just recently, in some of the coding, the metadata that we use for coding themes within books, there's actually now like a deconversion story kind of code as of recently, because that sort of area of writing has developed a lot of traction. But most of the books that I'd come across, including some from Australia, are mostly focused on one person's story. So it's like a full memoir following someone. It might be someone who's already well known or not. Uh, but there weren't many kind of compilations of different stories. And I think that in this context, I think that format's really valuable because it's sort of like, you know, you think about a gem where it's got all its different facets. You're kind of exploring things from different angles and putting a range of voices together, and it sort of builds a bigger picture than sometimes just one person's perspective can bring. So that's the background to the idea, and then there was the inspiration, and so yeah, that's how it kind of started.
Great. That sounds amazing. And it seems very organic in the way that it's developed and come about, which is really nice. It, is it uh, can I ask if the context of these stories is it Christian based? Is it evangelical? Is it a particular denomination? Is
Yeah,
it
really good question. And I should have kind of said that at the outset rather than coming with my own assumptions. But it is focused on Christian faith and mostly Protestant expressions of faith, and mostly Protestant expressions of faith in the USA. There are a couple of stories from people in the UK. And a couple of those UK contributors actually grew up in Africa as the children of missionaries. Um, but yes, however, there is a diversity of kind of denominational experience. So it sort of ranges from, you know, sort of Southern Baptist to Lutheran to people who have dabbled in sort of, yeah, one person I think spent some time in the Greek Orthodox Church and other contexts like that. So there is quite a range of experience there. But most often, people's experiences of faith have been in contexts where critical thinking has been not encouraged, and where difference and diversity of thought and opinion has tended to be perceived as threatening. So that probably gives you some idea about, yeah, the sort of context that people are coming from.
Yeah, look, for me, I've I don't know, personally been through quite a lot.
Mm,
And religion is a journey for me, which is both personal and intellectual,
yep.
professional, academic. My life's career, but also it's kind of stems from personal history.
Mm,
But I mean, I can fully appreciate these kinds of um, situations and circumstances. And what I was kind of wondering as you were talking is um, whether whether these kinds of what you're describing, there seems to be a lot of repetition in the sense
mm,
of, let me just qualify that. What I mean is, I hear this a lot, like this
yeah.
conflict, tension between um, what is meant to be religious versus what sometimes common sense dictates. And people find themselves in that quandary quite regularly, quite often. It doesn't always end up or result in um, uh, moving away from the faith or losing faith or leaving the tradition. It does sometimes. Or more often. I don't know. It doesn't. I don't have the statistics on it, but generally speaking, it doesn't always necessarily lead to that, but it does kind of sometimes end up resetting someone in a particular tradition or finding different avenues within a tradition. So what I wanted to ask you is, that question about the tension, I think,
Mm.
connect up with your thesis because Hegel. Um, and the other thing is, in terms of your book, I wanted to kind of say you have this word. What's the word? Stories of deconversion, right? So
Yeah.
is in these stories, in these anecdotes, are people mostly moving away? So deconversion, i.e., moving away from that faith. Is that? Do you want to describe deconversion for us?
Yeah, yeah, sure. And look, I should sort of
Let
preface
me
this
be
by,
straight to the point.
yeah, yeah, no, that's great. I love it. I should probably preface that by saying, in a way, a good catchy title is a marketing technique that's meant to kind
Absolutely.
of, you know what I mean? It's sort of it's dramatic, it's attention seeking, it captures people's
Everything you
imagine.
want. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So I guess it's kind of a broad brush stroke when in actual fact within the story there's a lot more nuance. I think because a lot of the stories, I don't know, there's a lot of trauma actually that is involved in the experiences of the people who have contributed to this book, and I include myself in that. And I think for that reason, for these people, a lot of the time, the healthiest way forward has been to create space between their sense of identity now and the sense of identity they had when they identified very strongly with a particular expression of, in this case, Christian faith. Um, and I think probably, I don't know, part of the reason that for them that I mean, some of the contributors have also kind of spent time in more liberal, I guess, expressions of faith as well, and the more edgy sort of stuff that sometimes, in certain contexts, is on the fringes. I don't know if it's because in the US the dynamics are just so much more potent in terms of, oh, I don't know, the social power that expressions of more right wing or fundamentalist or biblical literalist religion kind of has. But yeah, like I say, I mean, for these people, they've really had to distance themselves. And in a way, it's a reflection upon those expressions of faith because, um, what am I trying to say? In a way, and this is probably quite Hegelian, these expressions of faith have given rise to their own downfall. They've set the stage for their own downfall by being so narrow and so prescriptive that as soon as someone kind of is teetering on the edge, it's sort of like nudge them, you're out, right?
Mm.
You're not part of us anymore. And so what choice do these people have? Like there's no space for like a creative reworking. And I suspect that's part of your and my story, Milad, in terms of this creative reworking of like how can we intellectually and creatively engage with our experiences of faith in generative ways that sort of aren't quite in the middle of the swirl of all that stuff that can make it really difficult to be part of, I don't know, certain forms of religious community, but still actually be really actively engaged. And I mean, for some, I've made assumptions there about your journey, Milad, so I'm sorry if I
That's okay.
have misread. But yeah, I guess, yeah, for the people in these stories, it's been really important to draw a line and say, I no longer identify with that. And
Mhm.
because of the sorts of communities they're stepping away from, who have a very narrow understanding of, well, that sounds probably quite judgmental, but whose parameters are quite, I don't know, strong. Like, what do? You don't tick all the boxes anymore. Like maybe you tick 9 out of 10 boxes, but that's not good enough. So you don't belong anymore. So you're out. You, you're an apostate. I don't know. I don't know. I hope that's a helpful answer.
Yeah, look, of course it's helpful, tremendously. And there's so many dimensions there that you've touched on. And I guess what I'm trying to understand here, is this kind of phenomenon of deconversion.
Mm,
Like sort of, if I sort of wanted to press down a little bit more on this and how would I describe it? You know, what is it to deconvert from something?
Mm. Well,
Mm.
you know what immediately springs to mind
Yeah.
is the New Testament narrative of Paul on the road to Damascus, right?
Mm.
Where it's like this experience of the scales falling from your eyes, and you're suddenly having this vision that this whole way of life that you've been living, you've been seeing things completely wrong. Or, you know, you've suddenly got this new perspective.
Mhm.
And as ironic as it is to invoke that sort of
Oh.
narrative in this context, actually, I think for a lot of the people in these stories, that has actually been the experience. It's like, I thought I had the truth with a capital T. I thought my truth was the truth,
Mm.
you know, with a capital T. And everything kind of rested on that security of like, I have the truth. And actually this ties really well into some of the work that Diego Bubbio does on Hegel in terms of that relinquishment of the God's eye view. Like for the people within their previous expressions of faith, they very much did have the sense that yes, we have access to God's truth because you know maybe He's revealed it, but this particular expression of faith that I'm a part of is the right one, you know, and I think that's much more strong in the US too. Is that sort of from what I've heard from the different contributors, we've got the right answer and other denominations don't have the right answer or they're wrong. In particular denominations or particular communities, that can be the attitude. Um, and just coming to terms with that scales falling from the eyes of like, oh, I'm a human. There are billions of other humans, and we're all just trying to figure this stuff out together. Like, this moment of, I thought things were this way, but I don't think they are. And I think also that realization of, for some people, it's like, um, I thought I believed all this, but actually I don't. Like it's this internal cognitive processing that happens even below people's level of consciousness where they go, hang on a minute, like things are just falling away. This doesn't make sense to me. I don't actually think that way anymore. You know, I've changed and grown beyond that. I can't subscribe to that anymore. So for people, you know, in the book, like quite a few of them have had to work through things like creationism versus evolution or you know, wrestling with the idea of biblical literalism, or like, you know, treating the Bible as a literal historical document for what actually has happened and 7-day creation and all this kind of thing. Um, and one thing that I really, really love about all of these stories and admire so much in the different contributors is this real like commitment to pursuing intellectual integrity and authenticity, like, and pursuing knowledge. Like people have given themselves these huge tasks of researching all kinds of things about, you know, evolution versus creationism, yeah, and then go into quite some detail in the book, or about the history of the development of the biblical scriptures over the centuries and millennia that has taken. And it's actually through their learning that they've come to see, oh, the way that I've been taught to think about this, I don't see things that way anymore. And uh, and if you make belonging in a particular community contingent on, you know, believing in a 7-day creation or treating the Bible literally, or believing that you have access to truth with a capital T and everyone else is going to hell, then as soon as, like, what are you going to do when you don't think that way anymore? It's a crisis moment where you go, okay, I don't fit with these people anymore. I don't fit with this particular expression anymore. And I know I have to kind of qualify that and say I'm painting really broad brush strokes here because there are some really strong themes that come out in the book. And I know that it's horrendously simplistic to sort of talk about Christian faith as you know, as one color, when in actual fact it's just thousands of different shades and can be expressed in so many different ways. But I guess I'm referring primarily to the sorts of experiences that the book contributors have had. So, yeah.
Look, you said ironic that you mentioned Paul. I don't think it is at all. I mean,
Okay.
it is, but I mean, that's the whole thing. And I don't think the irony is lost on anyone who knows enough about Christianity to sort of
Yeah.
catch on. That in itself, this is beyond the reckoning of anyone in terms of what the truth is with a capital T.
Mm,
And regardless of what they believe and what they think, rationalize, convince themselves of, regardless of any of those things, um, in the biblical context, God does what God does. And so if he wanted to show Paul in that story, for example, that, hey, you know, this is the reality, then he did. And if he wanted to do something else, and he does, various things, and the stories of the Bible sort of speak for themselves. I don't need to repeat them here, but in each of them, there's an example of this kind of great paradox that you're speaking about in a sense.
mm,
So the irony, in another sense, is in this whole, in a sort of tragic sense, maybe, is regarding the way that these denominations or groups that you're sort of referring to have, perhaps unfortunately, if I can say that, um, brought about the deconversion of a group
mm,
of people who would have otherwise remained in those faith groups. Perhaps, I mean, again, this is difficult to comment on. I mean, who are we to sort of say anything about what's meant to be for anyone? Each of us have our journey, but I do want to underline that the journey is a very interesting thing, and a theme that I've been sort of thinking about a lot in my own experience and studies as well, because
mm,
the transformations and change is kind of it's pivotal to this experience.
mm,
And without transformation and change, I find it very difficult to sort of understand anything. So yeah, so I think this is really interesting. But I wonder what you think about what I just said in terms of, because you mentioned grace for atheism, is that right? Yeah.
mm,
Um, that's beautiful. I mean, in the sense that, again, there's a kind of that irony and paradox exist within the Christian tradition, in the sense that it is, in a sense, atheistical, and
mm,
rejection and reaction to, um, or moving away from and beyond, the Jewish tradition, the Hebrew tradition, and then sort of into a new foundational theology. Um, so these kind of things are there, in a sense, and I do find it strange that certain Christian denominations would then make claims of absolute truth,
mm,
um, in the sense that, this is it, and then there's nothing else, because it's, in a way, it has not the greater foresight of what Scripture has shown in itself to have.
mm.
Now I'm sort of rambling. I'm sorry.
No, 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 no. I mean, it ties in really nicely with, I guess, yeah, I mentioned earlier about Diego's work on Hegel, and I've drawn a lot of that in my thesis. But I guess in a slightly different way. But I mean, his sort of reading, which is works from Hegel, and there have been others, of course, who have uh, kind of gone in this direction, like Altizer. Although I, my head's not in the details enough to sort of make nuanced differentiations, but this idea that actually what the death of Christ is about is that it's about the death of the transcendent, the transcendent God, the transcendent authority, who is sort of like that external reference point for the truth, capital T, that sort of pillar of security. And then we step into the maturity of humankind, where we go, oh, hang on a minute, this is on us. Like the spirit is is in us, and it's up to us to sort of figure out what we're doing and why we're here and how we do it in the best way possible. And sort of, I mean, I feel like though that kind of a reading of Christian tradition would be, I mean, it's extremely, I want to say fringy, like definitely not cringy, but fringy in that if I go and step into my local kind of evangelical church around the corner and say something like that, people would just look at me like I'm a complete idiot.
Okay.
Um, Again, I'm making a generalization, and I think, you know, people can be really engaged with this idea of losing your life to find it, dying to yourself to find life, and that sort of thing. But that sort of Hegel interpretation of the death of God and the loss of the transcendent. There are lots of interesting tensions that exist within kind of Christian communities where almost sometimes it's like there are oppositional beliefs in play at the same time. That's not always a bad thing, but sometimes it can lead to intense cognitive dissonance. And I think that is actually probably been the case for people in the book.
If I may interrupt for a second,
you
mentioned that technical term twice now, and I'm going to have to ask you to explain that a little bit more for us.
Oh yeah, which one?
Cognitive dissonance.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm studying psychology, so I should be able to give you a good one. But I actually, how can I describe it beyond a feeling? I'll read you what I've just found on Wikipedia, because that's what's come up first. It's described as a mental phenomenon in which people unknowingly hold fundamentally conflicting cognitions. Being confronted by situations that challenge this dissonance may ultimately result in some change in their cognitions or actions to cause greater alignment between their ideas, so as to reduce this dissonance. And I guess
Does this sort of again connect up with Hegel's dialectic for you?
It's an interesting question. I guess in my mind, well, I mean, because the dialectic is all about being faced with negation, isn't it? And somehow,
in a sense, what I'm saying is, like you in your thesis, you sort of mentioned the you worked on specifically what's the text called? Lectures on the proofs of existence of God.
Yeah.
And if I understand correctly, he doesn't sort of reject outright these proofs. He sort of looks at the ways in which they come into conversation with a dialectic.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting text because it's actually the last written text that we have from Hegel in his life, and he'd just signed. So he taught a series of lectures, kind of parallel to the logic lectures, and I can't remember the year, whether it was 1830 or but sometime in the last few years of his life.
Yeah.
And so he ran this lectures on the proofs of the existence of God in parallel to these logic lectures, and then he signed a book contract to write a book on Dasein Gottes, the being of God.
Yeah. And
then he died a couple of days or weeks later.
Wow. And
it never eventuated. But one of the editors of the original kind of from Hegel's original notes found this manuscript amongst his documents, and Peter Hodgson, who's done a lot of translation, particularly of Hegel's philosophy of religion work, sort of says, well, we think this is the beginnings of the manuscript that he signed the contract to write, because it's more developed than lecture notes might have been. So it's interesting from that point of view, because a lot of the lectures we have from Hegel are compilations from, transcriptions or people who are in the lectures, notes and that sort of thing. Whereas this is something that Hegel has specifically written himself. And so it's not very long, which is sort of a reason why it's really appealing to work on compared to something like The Science of Logic, which is just brutal. And in it, it's unfinished. So Hegel really mostly is contained to exploring the cosmological argument for the existence of God,
Right.
which is about you know the contingency of the world. Basically, there has to be some necessity behind the world because the world is contingent. I'm trying to think of the traditional way of. I mean, it's kind of come up in various forms in history, but I'm going to turn to the internet again so that I can find. I mean, it's about first causes. Basically, nothing comes from nothing. So, what question am I meant to be answering again, Millard?
No, you're kind of on track.
Right.
And what I was going to say is, if you don't mind telling us a little bit more about this text. You started beautifully by telling us drop. But do you want to speak a little bit more to the text, proofs of existence?
Yeah, well, I guess maybe I can say why I was really interested in it, which kind of ties into what we've been talking about already. I was really interested in this because it's what I'm really interested in is Hegel's kind of epistemological lens. So how do we know the truth about anything? How do we know whether we know like authentically? What is reality? Like, how do we judge our own thoughts, ideas, beliefs, whatever as true, whatever that means? Um, and he sort of has two primary interlocutors. I'm never sure how to say that word. How do you say it, Millard?
I think interlocutor.
Interlocutors. Okay. And one of them is, of course, Immanuel Kant. I mean, he's just
Yeah.
he and Hegel sort of, I don't know, the two conversation partners. All of Hegel's work is conversation with Kant in a way. And then the other is Friedrich Jacobi.
Right.
And he's quite interesting. I found him really interesting because he advocated for. I mean, he accepted Kant's limit, kind of.
I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, in
do it.
German, you don't say "a" in German. You say "Apfel."
Yeah.
So whatever. He accepted Kant's limitations on the boundaries of knowledge. Like we can't step beyond our kind of experience into some noumenal world. But like others before him, he advocated for sort of like an alternative epistemological form, I guess, which basically corresponds to that idea of divine revelation. And so, yes, our reason is limited, but because we're fallen, sinful human beings, like that's sort of tainted anyway. So we get our knowledge, our true knowledge, our knowledge of God, through experience, like experience of the divine, and primarily for Jacobi, that through feeling. And so, like, that was really interesting to me because I sort of spent the first 10 years of my life in a quite like a right-wing kind of fundamentalist church community that was also Pentecostal. And so there was a massive emphasis on experience of God. And that is really, and discernment, discerning the truth, prophecy, all those sorts of things. It's all about experiencing divine revelation and direct connection with God. And Hegel has really interesting critiques of that I don't know, like always with Hegel, that are complex and nuanced and conceptual. But he really like Hegel really is wary of the danger of undermining critical thinking, undermining the human capacity to think. He's like, the human spirit, the human is human because like we think.
Yep.
And so it kind of, equipped me with a whole bunch of tools for working through claims of authority that are sort of perpetuated by reference to revelation, basically. Yeah. And hopefully I haven't just butchered Jacobi or Kant or Hegel there. Apologies to anyone who
No, it's
knows more than me.
but I think what you said was fair. In terms of Kant, I think, to my understanding, he, I mean, thinking and thought has a special place in his works, in his mind, in his thought. Um, and I was wondering whether you want to sort of speak to that a little bit more. Because I mean,
Mm,
generally, I mean, we're all kind of aware of Kant's, sorry, not Kant, Hegel's um, sort of this kind of the 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 happening of the spirit through time,
mm,
sort of showing itself in different ways and working itself through time in different ways, and ultimately with the aim of coming to completion. I guess this is his kind of prognosis. Um, and thought plays a key role here. And I wonder, and I guess to what you're saying, this it's important for him to not lose thought and thinking. Um, so do you want to? Do you feel
mm.
comfortable speaking to that a little bit?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I think in the context of my particular thesis focus, what I wanted to bring to the fore with Kant and Kant was
Okay.
was how crucial his work was in terms of making visible the role of the interpreting subject.
Mhm.
Because in a context where traditional metaphysical claims are being made about the nature of reality or of God or the truth, whatever,
Yeah.
to actually be able to um, take off the invisibility cloak or to actually see the invisible lenses that are coloring everything we do and think is so essential for me in an ethical way, like, because once we recognize that um, we're taking responsibility for the things that we say and think and do, because we realize that we're an active participant in everything that we say and think and do, um, as opposed to being sort of transparent conduits of truth or whatever it might be.
Mhm.
Um, the I think, and it's interesting actually being in the psychology space, because you kind of see this tension. Is that, like, I guess in contemporary and I don't know, in contemporary thinking or just in life experiences that I've had, like, once you get rid of that sort of transcendent basis of truth or that belief that we have access by whatever means to some sort of noumenal truth, which is sort of what Jacobi was trying to say, you've just lost a whole lot of stability in your life. Like, it's very disorienting, and you think, I mean, Christian preachers will say all the time, we can't, we have to stand firm on the truth, because otherwise, what is there? There's just relativism. There's just the slosh of people saying this and people saying that. We've got to hold firm and stick to the truth. And I guess what wasn't resolved in Kant's work was the dualism between the phenomenal and the noumenal. So yeah, sure, like, we're cut off from whatever might be happening out there, but it's still there. Um, and and that kind of meant that arguments like Jacobi's and others, and one of Hegel's lecturers at Tübingen, Professor Storr, he was different. I mean, he was probably more focused on supernaturalism and miracles and whatnot than Jacobi, but it was a similar argument that, okay, well, Kant sort of divided up the phenomenal and the noumenal, but that slots pretty nicely into the Christian framework of, natural revelation. Like, there's a whole lot of stuff that we know just through our human existence, through our sensory experiences and thinking. But then there's this, like, whole world of divine stuff that we don't know. But, if you can overstep Kant's limitation because somehow God's ordered it so that we've got this kind of access to that realm, well, then that's okay. Like, the limits aren't terminal. We don't have to feel destabilized. But I think, Hegel kind of steps in and says, well, um, his thinking is much more integrated. It's not, we need to kind of move beyond this external transcendent point of reference, without kind of falling into this subjectivism of which often is very individualistic. Like, I think it this way, and that's my way actually becomes the truth. So subjectivism can actually become absolutist, as much as this sort of naive metaphysical realism or whatever. But for Hegel, I think it's much more about collective, as you mentioned, history and ethics and right, like law, and human societies, and how we work through issues, and how we, our norms and our Sittlichkeit, like our customs and our interactional mores and things like that, that are what spirit is, So yeah.
So spirit is not working through the natural phenomena. Spirit is synonymous with natural phenomena. Is that?
Oh, look, I rigorously avoid making any sort of doctrinal theological claims or summations about Hegel. I'm much more interested in values, like in values, in epistemological values, in ethical values, in human relationships, and how we interact with each other, and how our beliefs about the world shape and interact with our interpersonal, interactions. So I tend to remain fairly agnostic on those on those sorts of questions.
Well, fair enough. I mean, I don't want to. I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No, it's your job.
In terms of Hegel and
Yeah.
What your read was on that. So in what so you looked into the proofs of existence. You sort of wanted to address this issue of epistemology. And tell us what you got out of it at the end. What your thesis? Is it too much? If I were to say, can you summarize your thesis in one line?
I can summarize it by saying it was basically me working through all my baggage, Miller.
Oh boy, me too. When I did my thesis, don't worry.
And actually, it was a total privilege to have the space to do that. And I have to acknowledge that. And also, so Diego Bubio was and Denny Schmidt, they were my supervisors, and they were brilliant. And that's sort of quite a make or break is your relationship with your supervisors with a PhD, and how supported you feel by them. And I couldn't fault either of them at all. It was just brilliant. So that gave me a great context in which to wrestle with all my baggage. I guess. So I'm one of those people who asks questions just by default, like naturally, like I want to understand the world. I want to know how stuff works. I want to know why we think things and what the implications are and all that sort of thing. And I guess growing up in a context where, I mean, not all aspects of my growing up context were like this, but some of the key kind of formative dimensions were, where questions, it's sort of like, this is what the Bible says and that's the end of it, or God says this and full stop, or questions are kind of received as a threat to people in authority who tend to be males more often than not, and these are sort of the conditions of belonging. I guess I needed my own intellectual toolkit and I don't know, words and concepts and ideas for coming to the point where I can articulate like why that feels so wrong to me. Mm-hmm. So it starts with that feeling, that basic sense of this is wrong and diminishes who I am as a human being, and why is that? Like, why is it? And Uh, I guess in the last bit of my thesis, I've sort of used, I mean, essentially Hegel's demonstration that any idea that we have is more complex than it at first appears. So when he's talking about the cosmological argument, he's talking about contingency and necessity, and he kind of uses these mental gymnastics. I mean, artistic mental gymnastics, not convoluted mental gymnastics, to demonstrate how the ideas, the very thing of contingency is necessary to the existence of necessity, which makes contingency necessary. And necessity is also reliant on contingency. And so there's this like co-constitution of these ideas that we kind of pull apart and segment out. But actually they're dynamically relational. And so any approach to articulating the way things are has to account for the fact that everything, every idea is related to is inherently relational. Like what things are kind of sort of we can't take things in isolation without considering their conceptual relationships to other concepts. And hopefully I haven't lost too many people by now. But basically it means that anyone who stands up and tries to lord it over other people or convince others that they have the truth or treat others like, you know, they know and other people don't or whatever, based on, I don't know, the louder you argue it or the harder you I don't know, the harder you are, the more intensely you argue your point. It's sort of, that's not where authority comes from, like genuine authority comes from. Like genuine authority exists when we can think with integrity, like when concepts, when ideas hold up, you know, when they prove themselves. Like the proof is in the pudding kind of thing. You've got to apply an idea and see what it looks like in real life. And does it hold up? And when I say does it hold up, like for me, that question is, what impact does it have on human relationships and human flourishing? So if someone gets up and says this is how things are, or you know, humans are inherently sinful, for example, and what does that actually mean? Well, I don't know. I guess for me, Hegel's taught me that things are a lot more complicated than that.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
and an argument doesn't have force, like it can't establish its own legitimacy by reference to an external transcendent, you know, foundation, like God says this is how things are, therefore they are. It's like, no, you've got to actually wrestle with the content of that idea itself and explore the implications for it and explore the other ideas that it's related to, explore what it does when it's embodied in people's lives, you know. And that's when you know whether an idea is worth holding on to or whether a belief is worth having, or, you know, rather than, I don't know, having a list of doctrinal tick boxes that you have to tick in order to identify yourself with a particular tradition or something. So
there's an interesting dynamic there in the sense that, for example, you describe the value of say the application of something to do with the right thing to do or the good thing to do in a situation, and it sort of proves itself. You sort of it's right when you do it and you feel good about it and you see the result, and then you say there's doctrinal tick box also, which just sort of feels a bit more distant and abstract. And it sort of feels like top down, you know, like you just kind of have to do this because that's the way it's done, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, there is an interesting nuance and complexity here. Like, not to mention that the connection of, say, ethical thought to sort of biblical scripture, but also in the sense that the way that you were describing, how does one come to understand the truth? The truth isn't sort of dictated to people, is kind of I'm getting from you, and I agree. It's something you arrive at when, I guess, in a way you're ready. to arrive at it. And maybe it's you don't arrive at where, say, they want you to arrive at, wherever they are,
Mm,
and you arrive somewhere else, and it's like, whoa. And that's the predicament, right? That's the quandary.
yeah.
For someone who's in a particular tradition but realizes, oh heavens, I'm this is not no. Guys, where's the exit?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Um, and see, I like that in the sense you're kind of describing, your search in this thesis through um, sort of authenticity of knowledge. Now, authenticity is a special word, I guess. It sort of crops up from
Mm,
Edgar, whom I'm more familiar with, and you would have heard a lot about that from um, your other supervisor, Denny. Um, and so, that's a special term. So this authenticity of knowledge, the nature of truth that you mentioned, um, and the role of critical thought. I'm quoting your abstract here.
yeah. Yeah. No, I like it.
Plucking out words here. Um, I think that's so important, and because a lot of it is about you wrestling with yourself. It's about you
Mm,
in the end coming to terms with what is true. And sometimes that might be not what you want or expect. Say the Pauline example,
mm,
like, um, persecuting Christians, but then becoming, as I might say, the Christian par excellence.
mm,
So it's a very interesting turn of events. So in a way, I guess the thing about religion is that it kind of does surprise you. It does kind of catch you. And one of the things I wanted to ask you also about the edited collection that you have is is anyone ever sort of or have you maybe outside of that come across any sort of stories that um, talk about these kinds of um, mm, troubles, but doesn't necessarily result in um, loss of faith or
mm.
particular tradition?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I should actually say, like, for some of the stories, and there's one in particular that I'm thinking of, um, where the contributor actually says, you know, something along the lines of, I now feel like I understand Jesus much better than I ever did when I called myself a Christian.
Mhm.
So this is not you know, a wholesale rejection of this vast, complex, you know,
Hmm.
so like massive Christian tradition that is just so
Mhm.
diverse.
Yeah.
And I guess, I mean, the sorts of literature that I would read in the past, it's like authors like Sarah Bessey and that whole kind of cloud of people who I'm going to put Sarah Bessey into Amazon because it's going to give me a whole lot of suggestions of all the people. Rachel Held Evans, she's another one. She passed away sadly. People like, I mean, even Rob Bell or Peter, what's his name, who's written The Idolatry of God and sort of draws on Zizek and Hegel
Mhm.
quite a lot, where people are definitely wrestling. I mean, they're asking the question fundamentally, like, what is the crucial element that makes someone Christian? Like, what is it?
Okay.
And how do we make that
Mm.
as, I mean, do you need all this other stuff to call you a Christian? Or what is that kernel?
So the figure that I was sort of thinking about when I was reading that your blurb of the book is Bonhoeffer, Dietrich,
Mm,
um, and he's kind of how does he put it? Uh, Christianity without form. So
mm,
it's kind of like dropping the formalism but maintaining the faith still.
Yeah.
Where is it found? Where is it located? If we
Yeah.
just suspended the form of the
Yeah.
religion itself. And one of the things I was going to say to you just then in response to what you uh, were sort of reflecting on is, exactly like how, in agreeing with you, exactly in this vast world of what Christian variations exist, where is the heart of Christianity located exactly? I mean,
Mm,
I mean, and beyond that, I would even say, like, in terms of religion,
mm,
how do you locate religion in one specific space,
yeah.
time, and strictures, and then say, for example, that's it, you know,
Yeah.
which is what happens. But there's 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 a lot of complex processes involved here, and sort of like the development of traditions, the ossification of traditions,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth. How people fall into routine, and popular versions of these theologies emerge and sort of take over and become dogma. And so
Mm,
it's it's a very complex story. Um, but at the same time, what you're sort of exploring through the book Apostate is interesting because it's so human, it's so personal, it's so um, subjective,
mm.
It's you just that's kind of, I think, where the heart of it is. If I were to
Mm.
give a mystical answer, it would be that it's person.
Yeah. Yeah. I
But
mean,
yeah,
it's
kind of like drawing on sort of Meister Eckhart, soul within the soul, God within the God,
mm,
sort of these mystical kind of things. But yeah, I
yeah.
fascinating, fascinating stuff.
Yeah. I think, it's
Because for
interesting.
me,
Yeah.
Sarah, I'm sorry, it's just I, deconversion. I guess I take issue with the word conversion and deconversion. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like, what is that? Let me be
Yeah.
absolutely honest, right? What? Come on.
What is
Conversion
it?
from what? Deconversion from what? And to what? Like,
Yeah.
what are we talking about here, right? So I'm thinking, like, wow, in this kind of complex, powerful, emotional, heartfelt, subjective humanness of suffering and confusion and all of it. Where and what? Where to and
Yeah.
like what? So I really, in a way, it kind of gets under my skin a little bit.
Yeah. Well,
No, 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 no.
that's great. I'm glad I'm glad we've reached that kind of the point in our discussion to acknowledge that, because it actually makes me think, maybe that's the point of it. Because it's playing on the Christian idea of conversion, which, in the traditions that the people in this book have come from, has often been a very defined thing in terms of what it looks like for someone to adopt a particular set of beliefs and become part of a particular community.
Mhm.
Um, and so perhaps what it actually is about is, you know, unhooking yourself from particular expressions
Mhm.
that, and I think, like I've said, because a lot of, I mean, because people have had such painful and, at times traumatic, and, even abusive kind of experiences,
Mhm.
there's, it's really hard. And, our brains work in funny ways in terms of the way that we associate things, the associations that we bring with particular words or ideas um, and for me, I guess the vision of conversion is, here's a metaphorical kind of church building and whatever that represents, or a church community. And the conversion is that you step in, and the deconversion is that you step out.
Right. Okay.
Um,
So the
you
format,
know,
essentially, you sort of walk into four walls, and it has certain rules in the house, and
yeah,
you walk out of the four walls, and you draw.
precisely.
So, I mean, that's what I mean. That's kind of what
Yeah,
an issue with. I don't know if I see it that way.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
don't
yeah.
see it that way. Let me just be
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
I'm yeah. And it's interesting because for me, I actually wouldn't use that word about my own experience. Um, Partly because I try to remain fairly, well, I've said it before, agnostic about any kind of set expressed beliefs, because I actually think what matters is how I treat people. And people can infer what my values are from that.
yeah,
Um, and no, and look, like I've seen the most kind of shocking and contradictory expressions of verbal, I believe this, I believe that,
mm,
and then
yeah, yeah,
expressions of behavior that are completely
yeah.
that
Content.
shatter that, so I'm like, I don't actually want to define myself. Like, people can make up their own minds about where I stand on things, but actually I want them just to treat me as a human being regardless of what my beliefs are.
Yeah,
um and therefore I don't actually need to be really upfront about, if someone says to me, what's your theology of original sin, or
right. Yeah,
maybe I'd be a bit more open about that. But, do you believe in God? Something like that. I
yeah.
think I'd have to give a very Hegelese kind of answer
Uh-huh.
that didn't actually give them a clear, I
Mm.
don't know, black and white, if I can still use those terms, kind of conclusion. Because I'm like, well, my thinking and my life is just more complicated than that. And certainly more complicated than, I guess, conversion or deconversion. But it's it the idea of it, I guess, resonated with the contributors to the book, and was a good marketing technique.
I'm not having a go at the book. I think it's great. The title's great, and this is why the conversation, right?
Yeah,
It's sort of triggering it.
yeah,
Um, like on that sort of strain of thought, I'm thinking, people like you say, you just want people to treat you like a human being. Yeah, absolutely. Me too. And we should all treat each other like human beings and have respect for each other as human beings. Um, and that's kind of also the sort of the flip side of it is that I wanted to say a lot of these issues that people have with their denominations or their traditions or their religious groups is human based,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
human to human. It's one wanting to exert upon the other something or disputes or violence or trauma or
Yep,
abuse, um, misuse of power, whatever the case may
yep.
be. Human, human to human, human
Mm,
between human. Right. So, I mean, to be fair, I mean, it's absolutely a human affair. The
mm,
whole thing with religion is a human affair. But perhaps one could say that it's a human affair in the context of religion, in the sense that this human affair has a, I don't know, is endeavoring to understand beyond itself something perhaps
mm,
true or foundational, if it's, I mean, within a theological context. And it's a very difficult thing for anyone to ever say, this is it, and I have found it. Thank you. Goodbye, everyone. I mean, it's because, I mean, theology is a complex thing. I mean, to
mm,
sort of make claims, I mean, it's an involved business in terms of, doing theology, working out theological arguments, and so on and so forth. So I do sort of respect that, but I respect it as a complex thing. I don't ever reduce it down to simplicities or simple factors or elements. And I think this is where the difficulty lies, where there's sort of those complexities are confused for simplicities and they're reduced to sort of dictum of sort
mm,
and thus imposed upon other people
mm,
or made to serve other purposes to do with power,
mm.
prestige, and that kind of creates all sorts of problems, all kinds of human problems, right? Um, I don't know. How do you feel about that? Is that
Mm. It's
right?
pretty interesting. I mean, I think look, I think the difficult thing is, and so writing my thesis, I wanted to keep a really strong focus on, I was trying to say it's really important to think about these things.
Mhm.
It's not because it has a really significant impact on the daily lived experience of the people who inhabit faith communities.
Mhm.
So, your comment about it, people kind of standing up and saying we have the truth and blah blah. The reality is that any evangelical Christian church that you walk into, if you
Mm.
take a sample of the songs that they sing on a Sunday, or go look at the latest Hillsong album or Planet Shakers album or whatever. Actually, I looked at the lyrics of some of these songs. I mean, I sang them, for 20 years. But I guess from an epistemological perspective, that's actually what they're saying all the time.
Do you have an example? Like
Like, oh,
anything pop in
um,
mind?
I don't know, like, Jesus is it. Jesus is everything. Jesus is our foundation. We found the truth in you. Kind of, I'm pulling them out of my. They're not
Right.
direct quotes. But they're like these messages are actually repeated constantly in a church context.
Right. Yeah.
So, um, to actually go in there and say, well, actually, no, we don't have the truth, would be deeply disturbing to a lot of people
Oh, yeah.
in like the church communities that I've been part of. Um,
Well, that's not why they're there, you see.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, and the other thing is like while religion is like completely a human affair, um, or is humans doing what we do and trying to figure out what life means and whether there's more to it than us.
Mm.
Whenever, like within the context of Western Christian tradition and Western Christian Protestant tradition, um, and beyond it too, but I'm kind of putting parameters around it to help be more accurate. Whenever the idea of God is invoked, and whenever someone, whether directly or indirectly, like implicitly,
Mm.
purports to speak on behalf of God,
Mhm.
there's just a particular
Mm.
potency and power that is invoked within human interrelations. I don't mean like, a spiritual power. I mean a power like a human power dynamic. Like there's human power dynamics in play basically.
Absolutely.
Um and to me that feels dangerous because I've seen the damage that it can do.
As I have too.
Yeah.
Mm.
Um and that's why I'm really reticent to
Mm.
rehabilitate God, I guess.
What? Sorry, repeat that.
To rehabilitate God
Right. Okay. Wow.
beyond that.
Mm.
I get, and partly that might be just a reflection of, the process of the season of life that I'm in and the way that I've come out of particular religious contexts. And maybe that kind of,
Yeah.
I don't even want to say it comes later because there are certain aspects of,
Mm.
the beliefs that I grew up with, that I just think were actually quite toxic that I can't actually see in the context of my own life, that
Yeah.
I can't actually see them contributing to my flourishing or to the flourishing of my children if I pass these beliefs on to them.
Sure. Sure. Sure.
Um, and so I just go, okay, I've actually just got to draw a line under it, like under certain things, under aspects, and go, sorry, like I can't do that.
Mm.
I've moved beyond, or I don't know. The word post-Christian kind of gets thrown around a little bit, and may or may not be helpful, but probably not because it's too general again. But yeah,
Yeah. It's a very interesting thing you say. Yeah. I definitely sympathize. And it's a tough journey. It really is. And I think, did you say seasons? Yeah, I think
mm.
Yeah, it's seasons of life. I mean,
Mm,
we're in seasons,
mm,
and it just kind of happens, right? Seasons
mm,
happen,
mm.
and we just have to see it through.
And we've got to be do the best we can in our contexts, like do what's right in a particular time and place and setting. If I
Mm,
um like I still value engaging on theological topics, obviously, with people. And I really value, like half of my family is still involved in the church, and some of them are the most brilliant people I know, like brilliant in terms of their empathy and their generosity. And, you know, I to some extent, I subscribe to the idea that it's not what you do, it's how you do it.
mm,
I don't think that holds as an absolute statement, but it captures the spirit of like, sure, like there are Christians around the world doing incredibly generous, sacrificial, world changing things. I mean, there are aspects of our, the development of Western ethics. I just talk about Western because, this is my context of growing up. So it's what I'm most familiar with, of ethics and, the idea of the human person, and, things like education for all and things like insurance, which, it's completely a different thing now, and hospitals. And, that there are kind of long-standing traditions of Christian thinking and generosity that underpin some of these values that are just part of the fabric of our everyday lives now, and not only Christian, but it's kind of what I'm referring to. So,
yeah.
and I totally understand that, and value that, but I have to make decisions. Oh, I don't know, in the context of my own day to day life that are going to be life giving, I suppose. And I have to speak truthfully from what I've experienced because I think it will probably resonate with what others have experienced. And I guess this book is, I don't know, is a sense like has given me a sense of solidarity. Like, yeah, there are other people wrestling with these things,
Yeah.
and it matters.
Yeah. The tethering of religion and identity makes sort of the post-religious life, if you like to use your terminology, um, incredibly difficult. So, which is why such a book as Apostate plays such a significant role, which has grown out of a community um, experience, plays such a pivotal role, I think, in giving people a safe space, a sense of, well, not even a sense of, but maybe the opportunity to find their footing again, to re-explore themselves and rediscover who they are and where they fit, whether
Mm,
in a religious setting in a new way or in a non-religious setting whatsoever, in a purely newly defined way,
yeah.
from any formal religion, uh, albeit perhaps maybe some kind of spirituality or maybe even not. It doesn't matter. I mean, in a sense, I guess that's the gist of it. That's what I understand from what you're telling me and what the book has sort of done, and hopefully will kind of serve that purpose moving forward.
Mm, mm.
Cool. And I think that's tremendously generous, and it sort of plays to all the themes, ironically, again, in Christianity. That's the answer to all
Exactly, exactly. I know. It's funny.
Good.
I kind of want to write an
I
article
love it.
about it. Yeah, I
I
kind of
love
want to
it.
write an article about it,
You
actually.
should. You should
Yeah.
definitely do that. Sarah, I've had a ball talking to you. And really, really thank you so much for your time coming on and sharing with us. You always give so much. You always share so much because you presented also previously to the seminar, and that was beautiful. I enjoyed that very much, as I did today's discussion or conversation.
Yeah, well, thanks, Millad. It's I really appreciate the time you've spent just listening to me and to my ideas and yeah, I don't know, engaging intelligently and conversationally with them. I totally, um, as people will get from what I've said, I totally reserve the right to change my mind on anything that I've said.
Oh, absolutely.
And people can absolutely disagree, and I'm sure I've not said things in the most, I don't know, people can pull it apart, that's fine, but we're all kind of learning along the way, so this is how we do it.
It's all part of the journey. And
Yeah.
you're now onto a new adventure on studying psychology. So how fascinating. I can't wait to sort of speak to you again and off the air, of course, and then on the air again, hopefully.
Yeah, cool.
That would be fantastic. I wish you all the best, I wish you all the success also with the thesis. Perhaps that may become a book
Yeah, well, that's the
on
plan.
the
Yeah.
on the
Yeah. I've had
side. Yeah. Okay. Well
a,
done.
uh, a tentative acceptance, contingent on full manuscript submission and
Yeah.
review. So I'm having a lot of fun with that because I feel like I'm actually writing for readers, for
Yeah. Yeah.
people. Sorry to the examiners, I know you're people too, but it
I
kind of feels
understand.
different. So shorter chapters, a bit snappier, a bit more conversational. I think yeah, it's fun so far.
Fantastic. Well, I wish you all the best with that, and keep us posted on how that publication or when that publication comes about. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Thanks so much for your time, and thanks to everyone who's listened.
Yeah. Thank you.